Lunch break. So glad you guys have tuned in and you're sharing your lunch break with us. Or might even be a midnight snack. I hear those stories all the time, Scott. I have Scott Winkler here before, and you guys know Scott.
Welcome. Good to see everybody again.
Yeah, and we have Judge Marquez. I hope that's proper, and I can say that. That's awesome. So we're here today. We're glad you are. We're not proud. If you want to like us and share us, that's great. Telling a really neat statistic now, Scott. In 6 months, we kind of we started a new audience area on our Facebook page, YouTube. Started with 250 followers, and we're up to 8,000.
I just heard that.
Yeah.
That is amazing.
Yeah, our producer Mike Harvey, MLH Productions, is it can take a huge bow for that, or pat on the back. I want to thank Mike and I want to thank Nathaniel Tweed. They're part of our tech team today, and we have Dominic and Andrew out there today. And
Mike was saying when I first came on, I believe just as a guest, it was a very small crowd.
It was.
I came in here, electrified everybody,
You did.
and just bam,
Scott,
it was just all over the place.
Scott, why does that happen?
It's crazy. It just happens every
Is he
time.
this way in court too, Judge?
You know, as long as I've known him, whenever he walked into the room, the fun factor went up exponentially. Yes.
When you're not as talented in the law, you have to come up with other little areas to pump yourself up.
I love that stuff, Scott. But there again, you and I actually shared some real close quarters this last year at the men's retreat.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So
Great experience.
Yeah,
Wonderful.
It is. So we're glad you tuned in. We're excited about our episode today, and we're just going to get right into it. And welcome to Kern County Superior Court Judge Raymonda Burnham Marquez. I messed that up, I'm sure.
You said it one way.
So
Is it Burnham Marquez?
Burnham Marquez.
Correct.
Yes.
Burnham Marquez.
But Marquez is fine because it's such a mouthful.
It is, but it's a legacy and a heritage, and hearing your story just from Scott today really inspired me. So if you have any questions from our show today, you could reach out to us on our Facebook, and you can reach out to us on Instagram, and it's called The Real Lunch Break Show, and I like that. Mike Harvey came up with that. There's a lot of lunch break shows. I've seen that, but we're the real one.
We're the number one real one. Absolutely.
I like that kind of stuff. So as Scott, you want to just talk to us about our guest, because you get to see her, and
well, yeah, I'll be happy to introduce her. This is Judge Raymonda Burnham Marquez. What I have not shared is I believe she became a public defender here in Kern County in 1997,
Yes.
Correct? She worked as a public defender to about 2007, at which time there was this sprouting small law firm that a lot of people were talking about. This is going to be a big deal. And she joined just this powerful firm called Winkler Law.
oh,
And together,
he set me up.
together we joined and we created a law firm called Burnham and Winkler. And we were together for, I don't even know if we were together 24 months, because I do remember this. After like 18 months, things were rolling. I had
So
this,
she has stories about you.
and even before that, we worked together.
We have a pact.
We worked together in what they call the North County courts in Delano and Shafter. And when we got together for about 18 months, she was a powerhouse defense attorney. So my job was to go in and wow the new people that came in and say, hey, I've got this girl in the back that just tears it up in the court. And she would come in and just light it on fire with all the cases. I would try to keep the cases going out in Shafter. Then I'd come and work with her in Bakersfield. And probably, I don't know how long, I think it was 12 months before, it was either right before or right when she turned her judicial application in, correct? That she came to me and said, hey, I just want to be honest with you. And we had talked about it in the past. She had told me this has been a dream of hers to be a judge. And I believe there were some positions coming up. And I will tell you, it was because things were really moving. I mean, it was a fun time. It was a really fun time in law for her and I to do this. And I bet it was, 4 to 6 months? It seemed very quick that you heard back.
You're being very generous with the story.
Really?
You are.
She's saying you're embellishing, Scott. I'm just going to call
sure
you
I'm
out.
embellishing some.
Can I give another little
Give us the true story.
So Scott and I did work together in the North County before we formed an alliance, and he had invited me a couple times to leave the public defender's office and to join him. And I said, no, don't you understand? I am called to be a public defender. This is my ministry. And
I love that.
Yeah,
that conversation went on for over a year.
At least a year, yes.
And so then we met each other's spouses and we talked about it and we prayed about it. And I remember telling him, if I leave this county position, you better not change your mind. You better not decide you want to go do something
Yeah,
else.
I do remember that conversation.
Do you remember
as well.
that?
I do.
And so,
She
you know,
helped keep you straight.
Yes, she was a
well,
good partner.
you know, we needed to be on the same page, and I, you know, it was a sense of security for me because I was letting go of a certain amount of security at the time, at least in my mind I was. And so then not long after we formed a partnership, people started talking to me about putting in an application. So it wasn't ever on my radar. It was never a dream.
I thought you talked about it, no?
No,
My bad.
no. No,
My
because
story could have been better.
being an attorney was beyond my aspirations. You know, I wasn't raised to go to college. I didn't go to college until I was 26 years old.
Really?
And so people talked to me about it, and I kept saying, no, no, no. I just started this law practice. Thank you. That's very, you know, appreciated. It's, you know, it felt really nice to be invited. And it was just crazy because I kept getting invitations from people who were not in the same group. And one of the things that I learned from my experience with Scott is one of the ways that I discern God calling me to something is if I miss it the first time, the call comes again.
He doesn't change the page, does he?
No.
He doesn't. I mean, I've experienced in that in my life that once he starts speaking to you, I came out of the corporate world, he doesn't change that page. You know, he'll come back around and just remind you, this is...
Right. And for me, it felt like a plane circling LAX, you know. You just keep going in
It's
circles.
gotta land.
Yeah, going in circles and it come back around. And so finally, I told my husband, I said, I don't know what to do. He said, well, you got to go talk to Scott. So, you know, you can only imagine. Here I told this guy, you can't change gears. You can't change your mind. You know, we're going to form this alliance. And then I went to him and I said, hey, you know, I'm getting these invitations and I don't know what to do. And pure Scott Winkler, the gentleman that I've always known him to be, looked at me and he said, you got to do this.
Ooh, I like
RB,
that.
you got to do this.
Yeah.
And that was, it was like a big brother, a little brother, I guess. Younger brother. Just, it felt so supportive. And so I put in the application, never really expecting it to go anywhere. I thought, well, people just want to have, you know, a legitimate applicant pool, right? I remember saying that to some of the attorneys in town. And at one point, I just said, okay, God, you know, it's in your hands. And I know that I have always believed that God gave me the job because I don't come from any wealth. I don't come from any connections. And yet I am an example of why you know what a long shot is.
And honestly, if I can speak to the partnership years, that's what clicked for both of us. I clearly don't come from wealth. I don't come from, you know, getting our family's never been announced at parades or anything like that. But I did come from a family of love. I came from a big background of church.
Godly people, Jerry, your dad, and you know,
Absolutely.
Carolyn, your mom.
And she knows she knew my father, and she knows my mom as well. And what was interesting is I remember talking about, it's funny you mentioned that because I totally forgot. We did talk about what our ministry would be. That was very important. I totally remember the conversation where you're like, hey, we need to meet with Susie. We got to get Armando on the same page when we came together. And that's weird. That is 15 years ago.
Well, I've always told Scott that God has him by the scruff of the neck.
Yeah. I'm always fighting it. I'll fight it whatever way I can. She knows that. But
I love it. I did his father's funeral.
Yes.
And the one story that always stuck out to me with Jerry was his best friend did his eulogy. I was there, and his best friend got up and said one day they went down to a lumber yard, and they were buying some wood to make a fence. And so Jerry went in, and there was wood on sale, and then there was more expensive wood. But the wood on sale, and I think it was a nickel a board.
Yes, and it had been tarnished and beat up a little bit.
Yeah, and so the nickel board was a lot worse than the more expensive board. So Jerry paid for the less expensive board and went out, and they had loaded the more expensive board.
Oh, boy.
And it was funny because as Jerry got in, he goes, you're stealing this. Jerry's like, let's be clear. You're driving. You loaded it. You knew I paid for it. And you're stealing this wood. And it's funny because his best friend said Jerry went back and paid the difference.
Had to pay the difference.
Had to pay the difference. And I love that story because that's the voices that were in Scott's
Absolutely.
ears. It was his dad, and when you hear his mom, and I just love the relationship that you two had.
You know what? I remember we had the conversation, and I'm not saying this lighthearted. She really was a talented attorney. She was a very good attorney. When the call came, it wasn't unexpected. I mean, think about if she would be on the show now, and she said, "Yeah," and then I told Scott, and he said, "You can't leave me. You are promised." So, you know what? Just years of being taught what the right thing to do was, and you know what? No matter what, to this day, that is such a great memory for me.
It is.
It was, and I. What's funny, when I talked to her looking back, I had a lot of peace in my heart. I'm like, you know what? God's going to take care of me. I ended up doing most of my stuff in Shafter, and it worked out so well for both of us.
I've done a message one time that relationships are important. And as you did pick the right relationship, sometimes you have to be careful on who you tell your hopes and dreams to, because they can either crush them or they can, excel you to the next place. And that's what you did. God was doing something in your life, and you were there to promote that.
Absolutely.
And not hold them back, because the wrong relationship sometimes will hold you back. So getting into that relationship, I love the fact that God brought her into your life.
Yes.
I always wondered, Scott, who kept you straight at work?
This one was
I could help
definitely
at
had the
church,
task.
but I didn't know who it was. I'm meeting her.
But you know what's interesting is we did work in North County for I don't know exactly, for several years prior to this. And I promise you, she also kept me in line out there, because it's a small group of attorneys that are out there. And Judge Marquez had no problem keeping me in line.
Yeah.
And after, I think she was with me for about 2 years, her application went in. She came back and said, "Hey, they picked me." I don't know all the details, but she came back, and I believe you became a judge in 2008. It was at the end of 2008?
Yes, it was about 4 to 6 weeks after.
Yes, very quickly.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Yes.
Thank you.
She's been a judge for 14 years now.
14
Yes, she just
years.
shared that with me.
I love that. One of the things that inspired me is I did read an article that Garden Pathways had, I think, published. And so what really inspired me, and I think in your profession, and there again, as we've talked to other people, Cindy's been on the show, and that, how has faith helped navigate you through these professions? Cindy's show hasn't dropped yet, so I can't let you on some of the profound things that she's done in her new position. But there's always ways. God always opened doors. My wife's a superintendent of public school. There isn't a day she doesn't share her faith.
Yeah.
But it's not conventional. It's,
Right.
So how do you navigate through that?
Some of the ways that I navigate through that is speaking wisdom to people without telling them what the source is.
Yes.
And it's interesting because before COVID, when there would be people in the audience, there would be people who would recognize a proverb or a psalm or something that I would say, and they would nod their heads. But wisdom is wisdom, right?
Yes, it is.
And I think listening to people and seeing them and acknowledging what they've done well, particularly I was in juvenile court doing dependency work, so that's working with families that have issues with neglect and abuse. And now I'm in family law, and there's a lot of challenges there. And I try to start with praise for something that someone has done well. Because if our Lord appreciates praise from us, how much more it serves our souls. And what I have found is people sit a little bit taller and they lean in a little bit more. And oftentimes they're a little bit more receptive to some suggestions or some rulings or some conversation that I want to have with them about the best interest of the children. That it's not about what you want, parent, it's about what's in your children's best interest. So those are some of the day-to-day ways. There are other times when I listen to a lot of podcasts and sermons and things. My mornings usually start out with me listening to something that feeds me.
Yes.
And there will be a circumstance that is around the corner that I never saw coming, and even within my own family and my own children, where all of a sudden I have a prompting of how to respond, and it's come from something that has just fed me. Right. And so just having the courage to accept that and go with it. Because at first it was a little scary. I'm like, I can't say that.
I know.
And I just feel like my experience has been affirmed whenever I feel the Holy Spirit prompting me. And I'll give you a simple example. One time I was in church and this woman was on her knees praying next to me, and I felt the Holy Spirit said, touch her. I'm like, I don't know her. I can't touch her, right?
Gently, softly.
Touch her. I can't. She's going to think I'm crazy. My LA circling story, right? Touch her. So I reached over and I said, is it okay if I touch you? I feel like God wants me to touch you. And she's crying and she's nodding. And so can I?
Yeah, go right in.
So I just reached over and she starts sobbing. So she was releasing. Something released in her. I never said a word. I'm just like, okay, God. Okay, God.
I'm doing it.
Right, I'm doing it, right? And then after whatever period of time, it felt like a century to me, but I'm sure it was like about 5 seconds. She just looked up and she said, thank you. So, it's those experiences, and for me, it's a continuous step, and so then all of a sudden it's a journey. It's a journey of faith that I've had with God. And so I don't worry about the how. I just trust.
Yeah, surrender and trust.
Yes.
Absolutely.
And it could be 57 times a day, right?
Absolutely.
Surrendering.
Absolutely.
And so I just trust that process. And, some days I come in and, I don't even think I can get it all done. But God is the master of space and time. And so I just say, you know what, Lord, I'm just going to go in there and I'm going to do it. I'm going to trust you. And I'm going to tell you, it works out. Most days, it works out.
You know what amazes me is to know how our Lord puts people in the right places. And I think about how having you in the right place to be there, and you prepare yourself to be in the right place by listening to sermons, by participating in that, by being obedient. And something happened to me as you were saying this. I walked in, I was speaking here first service on Sunday. And I walked in, and my wife is COVID positive right now. And so she couldn't come. And my wife usually prays over me before I speak. And that didn't happen that morning because she wasn't feeling well. So I came here, and I had a guy named Mike Smith, who's one of our head guys here. And he came over and goes, can I talk to you? And I go, could it wait? And he goes, well, God's told me to pray for you. I go, bring it on. Because my wife was supposed to do that, and she didn't.
Haven't had it yet.
And he did. But it was funny because he came back to me and goes, thank you for that. And I'm like, well, no, thank you. But you have to be obedient for letting somebody else's action, what God's telling him, to come into place. You were obedient, but she was waiting for that too. Yeah. So I love it for you preparing yourself to come into a jam-packed courtroom in a packed day, but being ready to be obedient and be able to let God navigate you through that.
It's the preparation is almost you're preparing yourself to trust. You always constantly remind yourself, as you indicated, to surrender.
Yeah.
But to trust, that is really cool. It's like someone is playing a chess game with your life.
Yeah.
And you're really not the one in control of it. You got to sit back and have, them pick up your pawn and move it here. And when you get to that point where it's just you're surrendering everything, it takes a while, but you keep, as you said, surrender 100 times a day if need be. Yeah. And after a while, it just starts taking place. The game of chess is being played for you.
It's funny because I always tell people it's like a trapeze artist. At one point, you've reached the end of it, and the other one you have to let go, and you have neither.
Yes. There's that moment.
Yes.
Yes.
And that becomes that learning process. So, Judge Marquez, what was your upbringing that led you to this? Was your parents an instrumental part of that, or how'd that happen?
My parents were an instrumental part in a way that is probably not something that I want to share.
Okay.
My dad was in the military, met my mom in Louisiana, and I think the only thing they had in common was an attraction for each other. My mom was born in the church and raised in the church, and my dad was not. And so they married, and not long after that, they were young, because, now it doesn't, people aren't marrying as young as they used to be, but they were 18, 19, 20. And so with my father being in the service, we were around the world. And then when I was about 12, my parents divorced. And my dad went into the Air Force when he was 17. He hadn't even graduated from high school. And my mom graduated from high school, did a little bit of college, but never finished a degree. And so we didn't talk about dreams when I was a kid. I'm an only child, and we didn't talk about what you're going to do after you graduate from high school. As you turn 18, you go get a job, and there you go. And so that's what I did, is I turned 18 and I moved out and just was making my way. And the one thing that I've been teasing Scott, okay, what's the thing that you don't know about me that I'm going to say? And so when I was about 22, I decided I was going to become an Amway queen.
Oh, wow.
And so my girlfriend and I, we got in my little bug, and we drove from Sacramento down to L.A.
You don't hear that Amway word anymore.
No,
Right.
you don't.
Yeah,
That
but it was a big deal
term for us.
It
Absolutely.
was. It was.
So went down there to this convention, and I was like, I can do this,
I'm going to be a millionaire.
I'm going to be a millionaire. So I bought the startup product, and I went back home, and I couldn't even sell soap to my mom.
I love that, Judge. I
And
love
I'm like,
that.
oh, this is not good.
Right.
I have all this product, and I'm out all this money.
They told me it would work.
Right? It's not working. So it felt at the moment like a sense of failure. But what I can see in hindsight is that was the beginning of my searching for a purpose-driven life.
I love that.
And so I didn't want to trade my time for dollars. I wanted there to be purpose to what I did. And eventually, I was able to go back to school when I was 26. And I knew I wanted to be in a helping profession. I was going to be a motivational speaker because I thought Zig Ziglar was the next best thing. And I ended up studying to be a politician for 5 years.
Really?
So I worked with a local state senator in Santa Barbara. I went to Washington, D.C. and worked with a congresswoman. And I came back to Sacramento, and I was a Senate fellow for a year. And then I realized I'm not meant to be a politician. Yeah, too many different constituencies, and I didn't do that well. I wanted to advocate for one person and one point of view at a time. And so that's how I became a lawyer. As I went to law school, and there was a teacher my first year of law school who was a public defender in D.C., and I fell in love. And for the first time in my life, in my heart, I'm like, I know what I was meant to do. I am meant to advocate for people who are considered the lowest of the low, and no one will stand with them.
Very cool.
And so that's how I started.
I will tell you.
Because it's almost like God puts these pieces together, but at the right timing. But at the moment, we don't feel like it's the right timing, do we?
No.
It's like you're like, well, that didn't work. Well, that didn't work. But they're little pieces that's coming, because I always tell people he doesn't let any of our past go to waste. He uses it all.
Mm-hmm.
All for his good.
Yes.
All for his good. Isn't there Riley Clemens, doesn't she have a song about that? It's all for his good.
It is. And so some people are like, oh, I can never. I go, yes, you can. And your story is perfect.
It makes so much sense. I know I've heard a lot of your story before, but I've never heard you use the word purpose-driven life. When you were a public defender, you were an attorney with a purpose, which is not necessarily like others out there. That makes so much sense. And a lot of people, if you asked about Judge Marquez, would say, "Oh, she's a grinder. She's gonna come at you. She's gonna come at you." That makes so much sense. You were just purpose-driven to that particular client. That's very cool. Yeah. Very cool.
That's what I love about this show, because we'll have people who go back and they'll hear these things, and all of a sudden it affects them, and then they'll let us know. But sometimes I'm never able to get back to the guest or the co-host and go, oh my gosh, it is. But it's another avenue to get something out. And I love the fact that as you work your way through it, even into the politics, you spend a lot of quality time, and God, I think, uses that to keep sharpening us too when we get there. And like you said, boom, this is what I know. And then you're taking it to the highest level in your profession. I love that.
That is very cool. Very cool.
I think it's important to know what we don't want to do. And and that gives
That's
you
a
context.
good point.
You
Yeah.
get context. And so I tell my children this, they're learning and why do I have to take this? And it's, well, learn what you don't want to do, and that helps you to narrow what you do want to do.
That is very cool. You had, I believe, as a guest, Russell Johnson.
I did.
And I remember when he was talking about when he was graduating college, they looked at him and he said, make sure you do something you love, no matter what.
It affected Russell.
It is good, but I will tell you this. Most of us, before we get there, are broke. We graduate college and we're looking, I never intend on being a banker. I'm a banker. What you just said is sometimes you keep working. And if you're praying through this thing, you have to almost wean out many things you realize, I don't want to do that. This is something I know I don't want to do. And before God brings that whole path before you.
My oldest daughter asked me a question the other day because, she's got a dream job that she's working for a university, but there feels there's a couple of more jumps. And she came to me and asked me, but it wasn't like me lording over her. I wasn't the dad anymore. I'm more of a coach.
Mm-hmm.
And I go, honey, well, how's it worked so far? Has God let you down? She goes, no, but in those moments. And I go, but that's the way it's supposed to be.
Yeah.
We're all in that process where, you feel like me, I always tell people, when I get to the end of my rope, I'm going to tie a knot in it because, you're all holding on
all the time,
some way, but God then comes through. But then, like you said, it sharpens you for that next step, that next project, whatever it is. And I love the fact that your children are a great way to, and I shared that with the congregation here at the Northwest campus the other day, children can't live on their parents' faith.
Mm-hmm. That's true.
Yes, absolutely.
I remember my first daughter moved out and go to college, and I kept telling her, and it was funny because Pastor Ron and I were telling her what churches to go to. She's like, I think I can figure this out. It was my first really letting go.
Mm-hmm.
God, can she really find a church to go to? And she did,
Yeah.
and thrived at other things. But it's that letting go that in my children's life has been that. So my other daughter was, felt God was moving her to Tennessee. I'm like, right on, kid. Let's, how are we getting there? U-Haul, plane, whatever. Because I had that first experience. So I love that.
No, that is very cool. We can pray for them. We can keep praying for their journey, but at the end of the day, it's got to be their walk.
Yeah.
It's difficult. My kids are at that age right now, but probably similar to you, Tom, where you have to let go and you're just, I'm hanging on at the end of the rope watching them saying, please latch on.
God,
please latch on.
Please let them make the right decisions.
Absolutely. That's very cool.
I like that. I love your stories. And anything else you'd like to leave our audience with that maybe, I love that fact that you like Zig Ziglar. I love his quotes. I do. And I love the fact that you prepare yourself before you come into your workspace, which happens to be in a position where you are there making some big decisions that a lot of us, I don't make those decisions. And so as you're doing it, you are being guided by something, and we call it the Holy Spirit. And that's,
yes, we do.
Yeah, and that's the power of it. And I think so some of the audience that are out there, when you're sitting on the other side, maybe looking up, it's comfort there. Yeah, that's what I would get out of this. And I would agree that God has called you to that position because we need people in those positions, and we need to know that there's something that's, got them. And your story of how the Amway Queen, I love that because I remember that. I mean, one of the first multi-marketing, principles out there, even though I do think Jesus started it with the 11 disciples.
Yeah.
Right.
He had a product, and 11 guys got out there, and I still think it was a weak product because he wants to use me. Wants to use you.
But that's the beauty of it.
Is.
And I think that goes to sharing our story, is how we felt so unqualified. I was having some physical therapy today because I sit all day and I get tight hips. And so, I'm talking to this young woman, and so she's asking me, well, what do you do? And I said, well, I'm a professional sitter. And she's like, what does that mean? I said, I listen to people. And she said, oh, I said, I can't just get up, like they say, like every 50 minutes and just walk for 10 minutes. So I said, I have to sit for 3 hours at a time. And I could just see she's just flabbergasted. She has no idea what I do.
Well, just get up.
Right. And I said, I'm a judge. And so she's young. I would say she's probably in her early to mid-20s. And so she's asking me about that. Wow, you know? And I said, yeah, I never saw it coming. And we were talking about how God qualifies the called.
Yes.
He doesn't call the qualified.
He doesn't need our ability. He needs the availability.
Right. And, you know, you think about Moses, you know, he's like, no, God, not me. Call my brother, right? You know, and so those stories, and our stories are among them.
Yes,
and
they
I
are.
think sometimes we forget that we are the continuation. We're the body now.
Yeah.
And if we'll share our vulnerabilities and like you talk about, you know, anxieties and things and how we felt unqualified.
Hope.
It is hope. And it, I think, invites other people, oh, maybe that can be me. Because absolutely it can be them, right?
Absolutely.
Because in my mind, I look at a judge and go, they got it all together. People will come to me and they'll ask me questions. I'm going, I got a wife, I got a marriage.
Yeah.
You know, I just found out on the Valentines shows, I know very little about her. We did a Valentines special, and I'm like, oh no. We've been married 27 years, and I got that wrong. But I technically think I was right. Oh, you're a judge. So, if you watch the Valentines special.
Okay.
So, we had the host, Kyle was one, and Adrian, and they gave us, you know, newlywed questions.
Yes.
Type thing. So they said, okay, at the same time, how many years have you been married? My wife said 27. I said 28. She looked at me. She goes, you don't know how long we've been married? I go, well, I do. But I'm adding months because May is coming up in 5 months. So we're closer to 28 than
You're
27.
rounding up.
I did. And the judges didn't get me credit
I'm
for
going
it.
to give you credit for that.
Huh?
I'm going to give you credit.
But see, I'm glad you would, but I don't know if the judge would give me credit for that because technically it wasn't our anniversary. My wife explained that to me. And I go, but I want credit for those other months. I want the 7 months into the 28th year.
I've made a deposit.
Yes.
Yes, I want interest on that.
And listen, when we're little kids, we sit there, we don't say we're 4, we say we're 4.5.
Yeah.
And parents are like, yes, he's 4.5. If we're going to acknowledge that time then, why don't you get credit for it now?
I know, but it was just a funny
yes,
thing.
Judge, I think that would be the correct decision right there.
She's not going to judge me. but I love the fact that as you're there and you're talking to people, and you had a physical therapist working on you, and you're able to get her head spinning too. How do you plan a career like that? Didn't see it coming.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
How'd she respond to that?
Wow. Yeah, she just, you know.
That's so young too.
Yeah.
Oh,
You know, to
when you-
hear those words. That is
When I
such a
look
young
out
age.
there and I see our tech crew and they're all young, and
Yeah.
you know, I tell people, and I think Mike Harvey walked out, but I keep telling people, and I said it on another show. In my 50s, the check engine light would come on, and I'd fix it, and it would go off. But at 60, it just blinks
Exactly.
constantly. And so Mike Harvey had an accident on a bike last night, and he goes, "I didn't recover. I'm 40." And I go, "Oh yeah, you know."
It starts happening.
Yeah, if you put a few more years on that, and so you can tell the youngins that was a young age, but there's still hope. 26, going back to college, forging forward, going to a political direction, then turning back. I love that, Judge.
Absolutely.
I do.
Great story.
Thank
Wonderful.
you.
Anything you want
God
to
is
leave?
great.
He is. Anything
the
you want to leave
time.
the audience with? Any mentor? Was there a mentor in your life?
I have had the good fortune to have a lot of spiritual parents and a lot of mentors.
Yes. God's sufficient in that area too, isn't he?
Oh, he
Where-
meets my needs beyond.
Wherever there's a deficiency, he fills the gap.
Yes.
I always said he's like the goo. And boys, when we were little, we'd put this goo in our tires. And so when a nail would pop through it, it would
Yeah.
fill it.
Right.
I said,
Well, and you need that for the goat heads around here.
yes, you do.
Absolutely.
You know, goat has. I mean, so as you're there, it's one of those things, I think God's goo. Wherever there's a hole, he plugs it.
Yes.
Right.
And he's a genius at seeing the hole that we don't see
Yes.
and that he needs to fill.
Absolutely.
So I love
Absolutely.
Well,
A
I
good
love-
time. That was good.
Judge, thank me. I shake your hand. Thank you for doing what you do, but thank you for being a believer in doing what you do. Because I think that's like you're saying, I have purpose. I know what I'm doing, and I'm going to stay in this, and I'm going to be steadfast. Scott, you're always a blessing to have on the show.
I love it. I love it. I'm thanking you so much.
Yeah.
I really appreciate you
Thank
coming
you.
here as
I
well.
appreciate
Tom
the
inviting me
invitation.
back. That was awesome.
Yeah.
All right. I
Yeah.
can't wait to do it again.
Yeah, well, you will too, Scott.
All right,
I love
all
being
right.
around with you. Judge, again, thank you very much.
My
Glad you
privilege.
guys allowed us into your lunch break, or maybe the midnight snack. Whatever you're doing, watch it. Let us know if you liked it. But there again, thank you for letting us join in with you today. So
Thank you very much.
God bless.
Take care.